Welcome, everyone. This is Taylor Ellwood with Magical Experiments, and today I'm happy to have Diana Ragel on from The Spirited Witch joining me as we end up talking about how to simplify magic. And as people pop in, I will briefly greet them unless we get a whole bunch of people. And if there are questions and comments, I will definitely read those aloud. But in the meantime, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are, and
Okay.
we'll
Well,
get into it.
okay. Hi, I'm Diana Rachel. I am a Substacker from a while ago now. I run the Spirited Witch excuse me, the Spirited Witch Practical Living for Spooky People. So more of a mouthful than I expected today. I am also the author of books you may or may not have heard of, like Urban Magic: A Guide for the City Witch, Hex Twisting, and these cute little Sabbat books for Maven and Samhain that I wrote a long time ago that have now followed me across countries, which is kind of fantastic. So that is me. Hi.
Hi. Welcome, welcome. Welcome Sheena, welcome Thian and Aya and Noctua. Glad to have you all here. As we end up talking about this, if you have comments or questions, feel free to drop those in. I thought that it would be kind of fun to do an interview talking about how to make magic simpler. And part of this was because you and I kind of had a little back and forth where I made or note and then you kind of commented on how like sometimes you have the kitchen sink and learning
Mhm.
to like let that go. And I think this is not an uncommon thing, I think, for a lot of people. Like people get into magic and they read a spell book, they read something else and they make it a lot more complicated because they're thinking like I have to have all the things. I have to have the candles, the incense, the oils, the ritual clothing, the tools that I've
Yeah.
handmade, all the other things. And it can be a little overwhelming.
Yeah. And I have definitely there is also the inner magpie aspects. Like I think you may have seen some of the pictures of my herb shelf, and like my living room has my altar and my stuff, and you can see that there is a little bit of shiny hoarding going on. There really is. Um, but oddly, especially since I met my spouse Sinti, and Sinti is very much an animist, like animist, and it has shown me deeply how much I can simplify my work. So while I have all of the bells and whistles and I enjoy them, some days you can get by with just a bottle of water and conversation, and you don't even necessarily need the bottle of water. And that has been it has required a radical worldview shift, but the old worldview hasn't entirely gone away because folk magic works, spells work, and they work in this very visceral, easy to please the inner child part of your brain. But then, unfortunately, if you've got an inner child with parent damage, there's this where things can go awry. And so this is kind of where we ended up having the back and forth because I recently had a few things go awry because I was kitchen sinking everything in my life, including my spells.
Yeah. So first, I just want to welcome Allison and Helena to the call here. Welcome. And again, if you have questions or comments, please drop those in. So yeah, well, let's talk about that because I think you make a really good point. There is a place and a purpose for having the ritual. And I mean, even though I am very much a person, I have a mantra kind of like get rid of the needless complexity in one's life. Like I'm a firm believer in that. Get rid of the needless complexity, the things that you don't understand, or the things that are like that make something far more complicated than it needs to be. I'm also a firm believer that it's really important to incorporate the right elements in that sometimes having something that seems more complex is actually the right call because it makes a lot more sense. So, so share. I'm curious, like, what's an example of kitchen sinking in this case, and what does it mean? Actually, we just got a question from Aya, so let that does a perfect segue into this.
So, kitchen sink is kind of a US American aphorism where it was a running joke where, like, if somebody was like ordering a super big sandwich with all of the fixings, they'd say all that in the kitchen sink, like throwing in everything in the kitchen. So that's where that comes from. So to talk about kitchen sinking it's, for example, if I'm working on prosperity magic, I could just put out, a bowl of water with a rose of Jericho And if I'm feeling fancy, add a dime. But I am an chronic overdoer. So there are times where I will have that 20 minutes of some type of prayer ritual to go with it, a couple of candles burning. And sometimes it may do the whole casting sacred space, calling in different beings. When most of the time, the way things work with me, especially as I have really come into my city priesthood, again, it's a bottle of water conversation and a crossroads, which I don't even really have to walk that far to get to. So part of this is, I think, comes from I was one of those '80s kids who got put in the gifted and talented programs, and I think that warped all of us that were in them. Um, I don't remember being given weird pills or anything, but I do remember they would put me with the kids that were more definitely neurodivergent because even though my IQ was a little bit lower, I could persuade them not to do things that would end in destruction. So and it did turn into this constant pressure of I had to prove why I was there, prove that I was good enough, prove that I knew what I was doing, and it was that combined with, kind of a very a femme upbringing in a conservative home of with girls, it is always, "You are not doing enough, you are never good enough, you need to earn your keep. No one's going to want you unless you are able to do all of this and look this way, and hey, kid, you're not gonna look this way, so you need to be able to do the other part times 3." And so there is that damage coming in with it too. And I am not going to say it's not even necessarily patriarchy. This is very much woman to woman transmission of damage. So, which, yeah, I know it's a complex conversation.
Well, it's interesting because I mean, as you know, I also do a fair amount of work in like the men's workspace and stuff.
Yeah,
And so one of the things that we end up talking about a lot is the not good enough wound.
yeah,
And so, this is something that as a man I've definitely experienced. Like if I'm not good enough, if I'm not like getting the straight A's, I'm not good enough, if I'm not excelling in the sports, I'm not good enough if I do all these other things. So I think that there's something very poignant about that and very profound. And it's like, yeah, there's this comes into our magic. Like, oh, if I don't do this, it's not going to be good enough. And so it becomes that sabotage that kind of almost in a way, like it's like, oh, okay, I've got to over magic in order to make sure the magic lands.
yeah, yeah. I think it is also that. And here's the thing is when you first start practicing, especially if you've been raised in the that's not real unless the church says it's real, or that's not real unless it's like a very defined physical way. So you're actually going against all the voices telling you there's no such thing. And then when you have a spell fail, there's more of a sense of embarrassment to it because it failed because, well, what were you doing something so stupid for anyway? It wasn't real. And that real, like, I see a lot of people who can't quite get past the real, not real divide. And I've been fortunate in that, my childhood damage didn't really involve a lot of church. And so I don't have that, okay, if I'm going to work with the deity, and I don't do a lot of deity work anymore, but, if I'm going to invoke a deity, oh, is this deity going to be mad at me? Is this not going to be good enough if I approach? Am I going to get struck by lightning for saying the wrong thing? And I can tell you, I have pissed off one deity, I know it for sure. It was very definitive, very hard to miss, and it was definitely not from overdoing or underdoing, it was from being inappropriate. It's very rare, it's hard to fuck up that much. It takes a Diana level of fucking up. You can't do that, I promise you.
I want to welcome Hans, and we have a couple comments here, so I'm going to read the first one from Thian. I have one. He says he has a question. I have one. Do you ever feel forced to perform spells, or let's say so strongly pulled that it's easier if you do?
Not for a long time, and this is before so there is an intersection. So these days I tend to call myself a spirit worker almost more often than I call myself a witch. And again, there's overlap with everything. So the witch side tends to be more the spells, and the overlap is the spirit work where your spirits may push you to do certain things. And until you cross over into that comfort with recognizing spirits around you, you may not realize that they are what is pushing you. And if you can't recognize that, you can't set boundaries with them. The other part, but here's the other part because there is one, and again, I live with an animist who does heavy shadow work through dealing with the animistic spirits of emotions. There's one particular one that haunts me that I think haunts a lot of people, and that is anxiety. And so it takes some practice to discern between, is this my anxiety, or is this a genuine spiritual call or an intuitive call to go, I need to move these moving parts into this position? And that discernment can be really tricky. And I don't know where you're at in your journey. If it's near the beginning, it's going to take a while to know one from the other. And what I would recommend is, if you're at the beginning level, set a schedule and set a bar. One of the things that I can't remember where I read it recently, or it was possibly like one of those motivation TikToks that I will watch sometimes, but someone talked about one of the problems we have with productivity culture, and this actually goes back to the never enough thing, is a lot of us never learn to set a bar for what enough actually is. Our parents didn't set a bar. It's excel, excel, excel. It's capitalist thinking, which is non-sustainable, and it is non-sustainable to our actual bodies. But setting a bar of, after this is done, okay, here's where I'm done for the day. Here's what I need to do for the week. Okay, it's working and it's no longer screaming. We're good. And getting to that point, getting to that, setting your bar for, okay, I'm going to do this much magic and we're done. Might be one spell. It might be, okay, I will repeat this spell once a week or 3 weeks, but set your bar. This way you get used to setting boundaries as you advance, as boundary setting and negotiation becomes more important in the day-to-day magic.
Yeah, I resonate with that. I mean, that's kind of been my own experience. That there was one time earlier in my magical life where I would be doing magic all the time, and part of it would be kind of feeling like, okay, I have to do something. And one of the things that I've really learned is that the act of doing magic all the time didn't necessarily allow everything to land. So I'd be doing magical working, but then that magic wouldn't necessarily fully land in my system, and so things wouldn't become fully realized. And I think that it's really good to kind of sit with that idea of, okay, I'm feeling the call to do magic on something. Well, what's that call? Honoring that there is some awareness there, but also like really looking at the situation and being like, and what is it that I also need to bring to rest right now that's going to allow me to close a loop and fully be present with that magic, so that when I'm doing it, I'm going to actually allow it to come into my life more effectively. And it could be multiple iterations of a spell. Like I've done long-term workings where I'll do something every day and kind of build up, build up, build up. That's fine. But it's also being able to create the space to actually let it land and receive it, which I think goes hand in hand with the boundaries, like that ability to actually receive something and fully experience it.
hmm And that is resonating with me very much, not just the arrest cycles, but the ability to receive. Again, a lot of us come from religious cultures in our youth where it was, you didn't really receive from God unless you were part of one of those MLM style churches. So most of the time it was, you had to give and you weren't giving enough and you weren't giving enough unless your every thought was of Jesus, whatever. I mean, personally, I think Jesus would get a little creeped out by the level of obsession. So, but it was, again, it's a radical shift into magical culture. And so it's very hard. Every time you think you've unpacked it, it's still packed. The other part is, magic kind of evolved from humans as a way to deal with our anxieties. It gives us control over the uncontrollable. That's exactly why I got into magic. Is my parents were trying to force me to drop out of college, and I found magic as my way around it, and it worked. It was controlling something uncontrollable. I just created new circumstances where, in that position, I was very willing to receive. And in retrospect, I realized I had some ancestors doing some very heavy lifting and probably keeping me from getting struck by lightning a few times, but I've learned.
Yeah, that's important. We're going to come back to that receiving. I want to welcome Odor, Sierra. Sierra, thanks for joining us. Noctua said, women internalize patriarchy and in the worst case scenario, police other women for the patriarchy. Mm.
Yes, they do. Very much so. And every so often they snap out of it, and you never know how long it's gonna last, but you try to encourage them and nourish those moments they snap out of it.
Yeah.
And the
It's
ones that are
interesting. Hmm.
I'm saying the ones that are snapped out of it, those are usually the ones that that other women will go stay away from her, so watch for a while and see if there's any truth to the stay away, but chances are that's really who you wanna be hanging out with.
Mm. You know, reading that comment, I mean, I'm a man, so I'm just gonna own that, but just speaking to it, like, there's something that lands in me with that experience of the patriarchy, where it's like I see the subtle ways as a man, and it ends up being policed for men as well, and how that actually prevents genuine connection with other men and with women because of those structures. It's something that it's really, especially in the last couple of years, has become very apparent to me and changed the way that I relate to people because there's that it's not patriarchy isn't very relational. It doesn't really
No.
bring a deep sense of relational. It's all based on hierarchy and structure. And it creates a lot of the complication in that not good enough wound that we talked about.
Oh, yes. Something I have noticed, and let me yeah, I would love to hear your observations to whether this is true, but it feels like in that hierarchy, there is a lot of pressure on men to achieve status, which kind of puts them in a position where they have to objectify everyone, even their close relationships.
I would agree with that. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely been a huge part of it. It's objectifying success, it's objectifying status, it's objectifying themselves as well. Like there's just this very yeah, there's just this constant and I see it even in some of the men's movement where it's kind of like the message the prevailing message sometimes is, well, men, you need to lead. Okay. Well, what happens when a man doesn't want to lead? What happens when a man wants a different type of relationship? Like all of those things. Like there's so much to unpack there. But it
Yeah.
definitely there's that objectification.
And there's also the men you need to lead. And my question has always been, and maybe this is just the men that I've been around my entire life, is lead what? What are you
Yeah,
leading? Do you know where you're going? Isn't there like this stereotype about refusing to stop and ask for directions? So how would you even know? Like within
exactly.
the patriarchal system, they're just like chasing each other in circles.
It definitely can feel like that. It's one of the reasons I'm exploring an alternative take on that in my own life and also with what I share with men. Okay, we've got a couple more comments here, and also AC joined us. Thank you. So I'm going to read both of these comments aloud because I think that they're kind of related. Diane said, "I feel that sometimes it seems impossible to set boundaries since I'm not sure who I'm working it. They keep changing voice slash state sometimes. Receiving seemed impossible until almost relatively recently." And then Noctua added to that, how does one feel worthy to receive? So I feel like both of those are kind of related to each other in a way.
I think so too, very much. I think the second one's easier to answer than the first one. Is you feel worthy to receive, you fake it till you make it until you just get used to it. It's just this is one of the places where a little delusion applied correctly can be healthy. And it's not actually delusion, you are already worthy, but you have to basically walk through that part of your cognitive dissonance where you think you're delusional, but you're actually not to become undelusioned. So, super easy.
Yeah.
Um, the other part, again, it sounds like so you have to remember that boundaries are things you set for yourself. And if people want to be in relationship with you, they honor those boundaries or not. The trick is that you can't set boundaries for other people. Um, that would be an overstep. That would be a form of control. That's not appropriate. But you can have a hey, here's where I gatekeep myself. And that does apply to spirits too. And it can be very tricky, especially if you are only now learning how you process information, how you experience spiritual information. When it comes to the spiritual and the occult, like, I've always like, those I think I've used this metaphor with you before, Taylor. Those machines that they will have at game shows where you step into the glass box and they have a fan blowing and there's money flying everywhere and you're supposed to try to grab as much of it as you can? That's how it generally feels coming into the occult at the beginning, and sometimes I still feel that way. It actually
Same.
gets worse as you go on. Um, Part of the boundary setting is making the choice of, "I grab these $3 bills and I'm good because 'cause I'm going to figure out what these are about first before going on to the next." And that means that you're telling whoever is flipping the switch on the fan that they need to not flip that switch and let you go deal with what you have before you come back and say, I either go hit me again or say, don't be waking me up at night or I'm going to learn spirit trapping out of spite. So these are some of these are some of the approaches where there's so much inner and outer work that goes on there. Again, I know it sounds so easy, and I know it's so not from living it.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. I think what I've discovered around boundaries and receiving, because this is really this may be helpful, is that the boundary is for you. Like, being able to set a boundary is ultimately for you. It's for creating that sense of peace and awareness, and a set of values, like knowing, like, these are my values. This is what it means to be in relationship with myself. So if that's what it means to be in relationship with myself, this is what I can share with other people so they're aware of that, and then they can decide if they're going to honor that or not. I can't control what those other people do, but I can be very clear about what my boundaries are. And I think that this kind of goes hand in hand with receiving, that being worthy of receiving is honoring and respecting yourself, and respecting yourself enough to say, like, well, what am I worthy of? What does it mean for me to receive something? And what's interesting is that when I look back on my magical experience, there have been lots of times where I've done magical workings to get something, but I haven't fully received it, and so then it's gone out of my life. I mean, not in recent years so much, but I've certainly had those experiences. And I think that what I've learned from it is, well, first I've got to do that inner work on myself. So becoming worthy is, like, for me, as an example, it's an everyday magical working where it's like I look in the mirror and I say, I love you, I respect you, I trust you, and I honor you. And then it's really connecting in with that sovereignty each day and allowing that to be play a role in the experience of the magic that I'm working and what I'm receiving as a result.
That is such a beautiful practice. That's lovely.
Yeah. It's it's something that I encourage my clients to do. It's something that I work with every day because I don't think we hear it often enough. Certainly not from other people, but we don't hear it often enough from ourselves. And a lot of times it's because we've been conditioned to that, going back to that message of not good enough. And the best way to counteract that is to start saying to yourself, I love you, I respect you, I trust you, I honor you. And you may not believe it at first. I didn't believe it at first, but the fact that I kept saying it every day brought me into a different relationship with myself. And that also opened the door to being able to receive much more fully.
What looks like delusion can be ending illusion because we will have those voices really fighting back on it. And I have gone through periods where, and again, this is part of the spiral of experience is when I was working heavily in the artist way, I was able to mostly get there, and then life happened. I stepped away from the practices, and I have to start over again. Also realizing that I had repeated some of the childhood relationships and adult relationships as I moved on. And so again, that worthiness shifts because it was okay, I was taking my worth from the newer adult family, and then the newer adult family shifted and became unhealthy for me. And so then there was that, hey, I thought I had processed all of that. I thought I had gotten there, and I am way back here in self-esteem land where I thought I was never going to go again. And so that can drive the anxiety, that can drive the not good enough feeling. And it kind of compounds because, like, it will unchecked go back, find the original not good enough, then just, make that exponential. And then you're fighting even more inner demons.
Yeah, exactly. And that can be its own creates a vicious spiral. So I shared an example of everyday magic, but Aya asked an example of everyday magic with a question mark. So I'll pass that over to you since I already shared my example.
So, my everyday magic is as simple as putting on a necklace that has marks from my ancestors. That's something I do daily. The act of putting it on is an act of union with them. I have a Polish eagle on one part of it and a piece of Sami silver to represent my spouse's family and that unifying with those ancestors. And it's a lot of complicated meaning, but it's a very simple daily act. Um,
Mm,
I will go through phases where part of my everyday magic is making sure I take care of my body properly, which skipped and paying for at the moment. But my when I have a yoga practice, a lot of people have forgotten that yoga is a spiritual practice. It's a different stream of energy from what I work with the folk magic, but it is very much a part of my spiritual makeup. And by connecting it connects my spirit to my body in a different way and helps me find unhealthy things in a very protected way so I can address those in a healthy way. So it may just be showing up on a yoga mat. For some people, they may not have time for that, especially if you live in the corporate life, that can be very difficult. So something that an ex-boyfriend of mine who is a devout Muslim did is, and he showed me that this was part of his cultural practice, is you walk through the door, you say a two-line prayer. You get in the car, you say a two-line prayer.
mm,
Before you have your meal, you say a two-line prayer. It takes nothing. You can remember it easily, but this is magic that's integrated into your life. For
mm-mm.
me, cooking for my family, that is, I mean, partly because it's just me and my youngest that have cooking skills that aren't somewhat cursed. But, um, for me, it's if I'm in front of my stove, my ancestors' altar is right there. They're invited. They're gonna be making their comments, usually supportive. And it's just this is part of everyday life, and so it is blessed and shared and already there, but I'm gonna be cooking a meal for my family anyway. And they show up just as much for the frozen lasagna as they do when I am doing the 4-course or 6-course meal. They show up for either one because it is part of daily life. Family is magic, home is magic, city is magic. And there are times, and it comes and goes depending on what else is going on in your life, but there are times where simply walking out your door, out into the world, and just feeling connected is everything. And there's no question of whether you belong or whether you're good enough. You're so connected to it that there isn't room for those doubts because they don't fit into the shape of the spirit body in that time. But it comes and goes because human's gonna human.
Oh, darn straight. That is true. We have a few more comments. Dion said, walking through the dissonance, that's a great explanation. Thanks. Sheena said, Taylor's mirror works. Taylor's mirror work works. Okay, I had to say that. I like to say that 3 times fast, right? Feels awkward at first. If awkward as hell at first, it is pure magic that's accessible even to quote unquote non-magic folks. Yes, exactly. It is true. And she also added, and it's a super fun bonding ritual too. Well, yeah, I mean that's just it. There's many ways to connect and bond, and we can do that practice with our partners, our loved ones, and whether it's with a kid or if it's with your lover or lovers, depending on what your relationship dynamic is, it can be an excellent way to really connect. And at the same time, it's also good because it is the connection with the self. And I like the examples that you shared of like your one ex partner because I think that's really powerful. Like the saying of the prayers, like it doesn't have to be complicated. We don't have to have all the bells and whistles. We can be good enough with doing something very simple, that nonetheless speaks very clearly to the world around us. I mean, I think the spoken word in and of itself is very powerful magic.
I certainly think so. I also think as the person who's mentioning the walking through the awkwardness, I think we undervalue that awkwardness, those feelings of discomfort for the sheer volume of energy they raise because you don't have to work as hard to feel awkward. Almost everybody can reach that real easy.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guarantee that on a given day, I feel awkward at some point during the day, if not even multiple times a day, and that's okay. It is
Yeah.
part of the human condition to be that. Instead of trying to measure up to this perfection standard as to how we should be or how we should magic or anything else, like, okay, well, let's just surrender that and be more fully with what is.
So lived example today. I had a sciatic flare, so I had a traveling masseuse come by my house. See my forehead? That's from the massage chair. So I got to start this super awkward because I was not going to get enough ice on my forehead before this started. And so I am simply embracing it. Also, I'm just at the age where not giving an F is just part of the DNA. You will love it when it happens.
Yeah, I get that. I'm at that age too. It's kind of like, okay, it is what it is. It's not gonna
Yeah.
stop me moving forward. And there's something to be said for that. It's very important to just allow ourselves that.
It
Um,
kind of, when you have those moments, it does show you who the people around you are. And it actually kind of shows you how entrenched they are in the patriarchy and status of it all. So
mm,
it's the, oh my God, that's so embarrassing versus, are you okay? And you can see the difference because the one person is more concerned with appearance and how they rate by being seen with you, and the other one is more concerned with you or with what's going on. It's actually
well,
really
I mean,
telling.
when you shared with me, I'm like, okay, well, that's all right. We're fine. Like it's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
it's just accepting because it's like I don't need me or you to appear a certain way. We just need to be really real and genuine. And look at this powerful conversation that we're having with all of these people here being part of the conversation. That's far more important than the fact that either of us look a certain way or don't look a certain way. I mean, appearance has
Exactly.
its magic, but
Yeah.
let's not
And I
get
mean,
caught in the perfection.
exactly. And I mean, 10 years from now, we're both going to look different anyway. So what's it matter?
That's right. I mean, if you knew me from a few years ago, folks, you would have seen me with long hair, and I don't even have that anymore. So there you go. I got rid of it because my hair started to thin out and I started to bald and I was kind of like, no, I'm not keeping the long hair. This doesn't really work for me.
I started raising children and it's growing. So yeah,
There you go. Yeah. Um, I mean, I think part of this too is with the whole not good enough. It's really giving up the myth of perfection with magic, giving up and really just anything else that myth of perfection that I think is definitely woven into the patriarchy in the sense that okay, everything has to be perfect. Like it's not going to be
yeah,
perfect.
very much so. And learning so something a friend of mine, she will come to me occasionally for spells or like she's not, I wouldn't describe her as an active practitioner, but she's a dabbler of convenience for lack of a better description. She wants magic when she needs magic and the rest of the time she's done. And she called me kind of panicked because, oh, it was either an uncrossing or a job spell where, I had walked her through the spell from a spell book that I liked, and she was panicking because the glass turned completely black. And for people that do candle reading, that is a very bad sign. That is one of the reasons why my middle son makes sure that there is a fire extinguisher in every room since I moved in with the family. And but what she told me after I talked her through, okay, here's how we're going to look into this. Here's how we're going to clean it up. It's just a small step by step. No, you didn't do anything wrong. And in fact, because you did something right, you got the indicator to tell you that something was wrong so that we are able to address it and correct it. And her comment to me was sometimes when I look at these spells and spell books, I forget they're not actually recipes. This isn't baking. you can get away with fudging a little bit. So I will say if you advance into spirit work, you do need to say what you're gonna do, do exactly what you say you're going to do, because spirits don't have bodies or calendars or schedules the way most of us do. So they're gonna have time to remember. But usually if you keep your promises achievable, it's not an issue. In spell casting, especially folk magic, there are many different moving parts that could be going on. So if you get a bad result and you do divination and it turns out not to be not like the most common actual mistake I see in spell work is people setting an intention without acknowledging the motivation behind the intention, or and then not working in how they want the spell to impact. So, and this is like my formula is motivation plus impact, motivation plus intention plus impact. Intent alone can kind of stray. Most of the time, if you've got those lined up and something else is going on, and it's not a spirit problem or an animistic spirit problem, it's again not because you did something wrong, it's because we are dealing with completely uncontrolled circumstances in magic. So there is no perfect, there is no covering all bases. The universe is expanding all the time, and that means magic is too. And it is a mathematical impossibility to cover everything that might happen in exactly the way you want it to happen, because everything around us has free will. Atoms are always moving. It's a thing.
Yeah, I think that the takeaway that I always get with spell books is that it's a recipe. Well, guess what? You get to experiment with the recipe. Like it's not set in stone. I mean, it's like with me with cooking. Like I'll follow a recipe the first couple of times exactly the way it's put down because learning the recipe. But then I'll start to think like, well, what could I do to improve on it? Maybe I could add this spice instead, or maybe I could swap this out, or tonight I don't have the thing that I think I need, but I have everything else and I have this other ingredient. I could put that in and see what it tastes like. It's not it could be as simple as that.
There's always room for experimentation. I think for me is I don't think like I am very much a kitchen witch, so unless there's a literal recipe, that's maybe the way I divide things up in my head. It's more like I'm frequently building a machine that is supposed to run temporarily.
Mhm.
So, which means that basically every candle I light may be a metaphor for a slingshot, but why not?
Yeah, I like that. Okay, we've got a couple other questions here. Helena asks, I took Wicca 101 last year and now I live alone. I live along the Bible Belt and I feel I am suffocating. Any advice for hazy periods?
Hmm. Build your faith practice. Do what you can to find community. And you may have to do a few things that seem a little sideways to get community. So, for example, depending on where you are in the Bible Belt, you might want to look for a Unitarian church or a Unity church. Unity Church, you may have to use a little caution depending on which one and how they run it. They tend to be the spiritualists, the ones that will have seances and mediumship training. Some of them get a little culty, other ones are very responsible in how they handle things. And I've been connected with a few Unity churches. There was something that recently replaced Witchbox. It like Mandrake Mandragora or something where people will list local groups like they used to back in the day. So it might be worth reaching out. I will say use the same cautions you would with any other religious group. Make sure you know your values, make sure you are aware of what seems like coercive control, and have your boundaries and values set before you go. So look for community any way as best you can. In the meantime, cultivating a daily or weekly practice as fits with your life. And I think that may give you more time to really develop those values, but also have something going on in your life that isn't just about Wicca. Have a hobby, have something that lets you connect even to people that are different from you. One of the things that I think has been costing the pagan movement was there was a period where no one really called it that, but it was functionally basically religious isolationism. It was seeking out other pagans and only other pagans, and we, people that are like-minded, accept that paganism is so diverse, there isn't a true match for match like-minded across the board the way people were kind of hoping for. It's, because I think a lot of us have that fantasy of, oh, we're all into this stuff and we think the same way about it. And my God, the fights people come up with, and they can use magic for them. There, you can check my book Hex Twisting about that. But one of the things that I've noticed that it still comes up is, one, we now have some people that have brought political extremism in. They ignored exactly how potent Christian spiritual warfare actually is. It was very dismissed at the time. There was just a lot of fallacies coming out of a collective religious trauma from that time that we are seeing playing out now. So, because of that, I'm saying it is important for you to have a mix of people that are similar to you, but ones that are not as well. That's going to make you better developed as a practitioner, better developed as a person, and possibly happier. And it could be anything from a stitch and bitch or to an art journal night to a dance night to something you make up for the hell of it. So having that diversity, and I'm not saying you have to sit down with the people that think you shouldn't exist. There's no hope for that. So just don't. But opening an avenue for people to come to you, it is going to make other practitioners find you. That is how that works. And it is also going to give you connections to a larger community. So when the fit hits the shan, you have more than just a really small group to rely on.
I like the fit hits the shan, although you could have gone with the other, it wouldn't bother me. But yeah, that's funny. I would add to that. I mean, one thing that you can also look into are online communities. It's not quite the same thing, but sometimes it can be good to connect with people online. I mean, this is a good example of kind of like a community happening right now. Obviously, there can be different versions of that. It could be like a Zoom meet community or something along those lines. I do think that I agree with you that it's really a good idea to like branch out into other interests. I know for me, like I've gotten a lot out of martial arts and getting involved with like a kung fu practice. And I found people who've had some similar spiritual beliefs in the process. So that's been really fascinating and interesting to me. Because it wasn't what I expected, but there it was. So sometimes it is finding those places, and I think that that's really valuable. Having multiple interests is going to make you a more interesting person, and it's going to feed your spirituality in ways that you wouldn't expect because it'll give you a different way of thinking about things in regards to what you're doing in your spiritual practices.
Also, you're
Theon,
very,
oh god,
I'm sorry, I'll say also you'll find yourself very rarely bored because there's always something to be interested in.
that's exactly it. Diane had another question. Any suggestions for a good general well-being spell for a beginner? Lots of energy, lots of spirits, maybe several deities. No idea what to do. I've been mostly trying to reach a point of safety so far. I've had several experiences that have left me completely fried in the past.
Ooh, okay. So this sounds like, so I am thinking through what's being described here, and it does sound like someone is kitchen sinking a little bit. So, I would say let everybody know that you're kind of asking them to get in line, like, basically make an appointment or cut back down to one or two deities or even just to the elements while you're acclimating. But it sounds like the skill that you may need is simply grounding and centering, because a lot of that early fried comes from not learning how to recognize the way magical energy works with your body and takes energy from your body, and not learning how to recognize that grounding and grounding, I don't necessarily mean earthing. There are some people that cannot connect with the earth that way without a little extra help. And I train these people because they're usually empaths or someone who has an alternate energy body order from what we typically assume. So, usually empaths, like I know one empath where his version of grounding is to stick his head under cold water. I think that's a little harsh, not how I would do it, but works for him. So, looking into grounding, and I am working on a grounding piece for my Patreon that's going to be coming out in January, where I talk about different methods of grounding. The base grounding, assuming you have a typical energy body or order with the auric body on the outside and everything, all the other goodies packed inside where they're supposed to be, is what you need to do is you're not just dumping any excess energy, you're actually making an energy exchange with the world around you. So, and you need to do this before you start and after you finish, because you need to learn what your energy baseline is when you haven't been doing anything, like an hour before or an hour after minimum, and what your energy baseline is when you are working with magic and spirits. Learn your baselines first, figure that out, and then it is usually, for me, I'm extremely kinesthetic. I would need to ask you some questions about how you process information to give you what was most likely to work for you. But for me, what I will do is I will really focus on the sensations of gravity in my body and kind of just like signal to the land itself, to the earth itself, hey, can we switch some things up right now? And then take a few moments of doing some deep breathing cycles and doing the check-ins to see how my body feels different. And for me, it's a matter of speed of vibration. Is I'm either vibrating slower, faster, or at the pace of the air around me, and figuring out what vibration or speed I need to that is ideal for the kind of magic I'm about to be doing. So, and that's just the super basic kinesthetic. If you're visual, if you're auditory, you will probably need a different technique.
I think what I would add or suggest or add to that is what I look at in terms of my daily routine is like what can I do to first of all wake the body up each day. So I stretch and I exercise. And then, I make sure I do some kind of meditation practice at some point during the day as well for grounding. So what I would really recommend is also looking at kind of like what are the practices that that you can do on the singular level toward giving good self-care toward yourself or bringing in spirits and deities and things like that. Because again, there can be a certain level of kitchen sinking or needless complexity that's involved. And like when I work with spirits, I also like you, Diana, I'm very careful about like what I'm agreeing to because there is that expectation of, hey, you're gonna follow through, right? And if you don't follow through, there it becomes that case of, okay, there's a problem here. You haven't really followed through on what you said you were going to do. So I think it is really important to honor and acknowledge that and recognize that. So what I would suggest is start with what can I do to take care of myself that doesn't necessarily involve anything overtly magical, but nonetheless is something that will help me connect with my body and my well-being and my mental and emotional states. The other suggestion I'm going to have is to spend some time tracking your rhythm, your cycle. Men and women have cycles. It's a bit different based on the physiology. But I mean, even as a man, I can track my daily rhythm that I see and see how even for men it tends to be a very kind of like a daily lived everyday type of thing, and I can still see like certain patterns there that are worth like observing and paying attention to. And like I know, for example, that like midday I need to do some type of meditation practice because my head's starting to feel really fuzzy at that point. And that's something that, then helps me to reground and refocus for the rest of the day. So that's an example there as well. Depending on, what you're doing, you may want to spend some time tracking your cycle and just being aware, like, what's my daily cycle? What's my monthly cycle? What does it look like to be in this body? And that means slowing down and actually taking the time to track it without doing anything, but that can also really open some doors for you.
I think that's really good advice. And I
Yeah.
know, like, I am recovering from long COVID, among other things. So the learning to read crack has been a thing because as you age, your energy levels are going to differ as well. And you can do something about them, but you can't until you have taken the time to step back and track, which a lot of people resist the tracking. Again, it's kind of like it's kind of like the avoidance part of kitchen sinking, where you don't want to see what you might actually be doing wrong. And it may not be that you're doing anything wrong, but there's that implied judgment, and you start judging yourself when you're looking at the things you track. So giving yourself radical non-judgment and going, okay, this is what I'm doing without the judgment is actually going to get you to the part where you can shift how you're doing things and cut back on what you're piling on yourself more easily.
Yeah. Well, Cynthia just joined us. Welcome, Cynthia. Glad to have you here.
Hi,
Uh,
Sin. I know her.
well, good. I mean, I know some of these people, some of them I don't. I'm happy to have them all here. It's great. This is the beauty of
Yes,
doing these kinds of interviews where we do them live. It gets to cross
I am.
pollinate a little bit.
I am always excited at everybody who shows up. I am just so happy they want to spend the time with me.
Exactly. What an honor. What a gift. So I think I kind of want to bring us to a close. First of all, where can people find you again? I know I'm going to have it in the show notes, but I always like to have it on here.
So, for the folks on Substack, I am the person who does the Spirited Witch Substack Practical Living for Spooky People. And you can also find me at dianarachel.com, where I do tarot and paranormal problem solving and curse screenings and occasional curse breakings, although they are actually pretty rare, fortunately. And I also do run a Spirited Witch Patreon where I am teaching more of the way that I do things, including occasional activist magic mischief. So those are the places.
Excellent. And as you know, because I've done these interviews with you before, I always like to leave out with a final word or phrase of wisdom. So if you have any final takeaway you'd like people to take with them as they move forward into the day, I'd love for you to share it.
Don't be so hard on yourselves.
Right?
Oh, and by the way, there are no real grown-ups. Those giants that knew stuff, they disappear as soon as you get tall. No such thing. That's what I
Yeah.
meant.
Yeah, that's real. Yeah. Don't be so hard on yourself. So be kinder and gentler and more compassionate toward yourselves. Give yourselves a little TLC.
Yeah, none of this is going to be on the final exam.
Yeah. If there is even a final exam.
I'm still betting on a punchline.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on. I appreciate you spending some time with me. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. And for everyone else, thank you for being here. And this will come out a little bit later today. So thank you all.
Thank you. This was fun. It's good to see you, Taylor.
Good to
Thank you for
see you.
spending the time with us.